What's up, Inspired Vision Algebra 1 class? This is Mr. Sonne. Mr. Gabriel's out again today, so you have the pleasure of listening to me again. Today we're going to be focused on solving quadratic equations. So let's take a look at our first question. In our first question, it's pretty easy. The first thing we need to do is solve for x. Hopefully everybody in the room knows what the problem is solving for x. The first thing we need to do is get rid of this 2. How do we get rid of this 2? Well, we're going to divide both sides by 2. If we divide both sides by 2, what do we get? You should have 16. Now, in order to get rid of the square, you have to take the square root of both sides. Now, there's something very important to remember. When you take the square root of 16, by the way, if you don't remember how to use square root key in your calculator, it's second x squared. But when you take the square root of 16, you got to remember that it has 2 answers. Whenever we take the square root of a number, you got to account for a negative times a negative is a positive, and a positive times a positive is a positive. So we actually have 2 answers here. The square root of 16 is positive or negative 4. So that's our answer for this question. Okay, if this didn't make sense, raise your hand, pause the video, and let Ms. Grubbs explain it to you a little bit better. Okay, next question. Now this question straight off tells us to use quadratic formula. So you need to write that formula down before we do anything else. So it's negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, see how I put b squared in parentheses? That's because if our b is a negative number, we got to make sure we put it in parentheses before we square it. Just kind of like the last problem. A negative times a negative will turn into a positive. So this number right here will be positive no matter what. Okay, moving on. In our question, we have a problem. And before we do quadratic equation, we have to have it equal to 0. Right now it's equal to 2. So the first thing we need to do is move over this 2 over to our left side of the equation by subtracting 2 from both sides. That means our equation is going to be this. 2x squared plus 4x minus 1 equals 0. Now, why didn't I subtract 2 from the 4x or from the 2x squared? Because these are my only like terms. 1 minus 2 is my only like term, so I can only subtract from there. Alright, now next, we're going to plug everything into the formula. So always in front of your x squared is your a, in front of your x is your b, and the number without an x is your c. So let's plug it in. So my b goes right here. So that starts off as negative 4 plus or minus, because we have 2 answers. B squared, I'm getting that number from right here. So 4 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 1. All over 2 times 2. Now, if we look at the first step, do they have what I wrote? No, they do not. They should have had negative 1 right here, and they do not have that, so that is the first mistake. Number 3. This one says, which equation does not have the solutions of 1 and 3? So we have to work out each answer. So let's take a look at the first one. Let's take a look at A. Whenever you have a parentheses and a parentheses equal 0, you can set each parentheses equal to 0. So that means we can do x minus 3 equals to 0 and x minus 1 equal to 0. And if you have x minus 3 equals 0 and you're trying to solve for x, you would want to add 3 to both sides, which would make this x equals 3. And then over here, we would add 1 to both sides and make this x equals 1. Now, is that the same answer as what we started with? Yes, because we have 1 and 3 right there. So that makes A out. So now let's try B. Let me change colors. Now this time on B, we have a trinomial. Whenever you have 3 terms like this, you want to draw an X and try to do this with an X box. Okay, so your A times your C is 1 times 3, 3 on top, negative 4 on bottom. Now remember from yesterday that whenever we have an X box, you try to multiply to be the top and add together to be the bottom. Well, those answers would be negative 3 and negative 1. Those multiply to be positive 3 and add together to be negative 4. Alright, and then inside the box, you put your first term of x squared, last term of plus 3, your 2 answers with an x. And then you take out the GCF out of this first column, which is x and x, because those multiply to be x squared. Then negative 3 times x is how I get here, and negative 1 times x is how I get here. Now, if I did that way too fast, please pause the video, okay? Because this is very important for everything else we're doing today. Now, the outside of your box is your answer, so that means we have x minus 1 and x minus 3. Isn't that the same thing as A? Yes, it is. And we could set each one of those equal to 0, but I'm not going to finish this because we already did it in A. So that means B is the same exact thing as A. Okay, let's take a look at C then. C, it's equal to negative 3. So I need to make it sure it's equal to 0 before I start. To make it equal to 0, I'm going to bring over this 3, but this 3 doesn't have a like term with anything. So that means I just have to put it on the side, like this. Hopefully that makes sense. I can't add 3 to the 4x because they're not like terms. I can't add 3 to the x squared because they're not like terms. Okay? Again, don't just write this down. Make sure you understand this. This is very important in algebra. Geometry, Algebra 2, Pre-Cal. This concept never goes away. Okay, so now, next, we're going to factor because we have a trinomial. Our A times our C is 3. Okay, because it's 1 times 3. Our B is negative 4. Now this time, is there numbers that multiply to be positive 3 and add together to be negative 4? Well, the only way I'm going to get to a positive 3 is if both of these answers are positive or both of these answers are negative. Like negative 3, or sorry, negative 1, negative 3, or negative 3, negative 1. Okay, these multiply to be positive 3 and add together to be 4. So that's right. Alright, now next. If I put these in a box, my first term goes in the first box. Last term goes in the last box. My answers go in the bottom left and the top right. Take the GCF out of this first column and you have x. X times x is x squared. Then we have negative 1 times x is negative 1x. And then negative 3 times x is negative 3x. Hopefully this makes sense. But look what we have. We have the same exact thing again. So since we have the same exact thing again, C is out, which makes D our answer. But just for grins, I'll show you what to do. Write this down. Alright, now, right now it's not equal to 0. So that means we're going to have to move the 4x over and the 3 over. And neither one of these have like terms. So we're putting everything side by side by side. And now I have a trinomial, so that means I need to factor it. And in order to get to negative 3, I would need a negative number and a positive number. And there is no way I can multiply to be negative 3 and add together before. So this one is not factorable. If it's not factorable, then we have to use quadratic formula or completing the square. But either way, if we use quadratic formula or completing the square, we're not going to get 1 and 3. We're going to get fractions or imaginary numbers or something crazy. Okay? But that would make D our answer. Alright, here comes number 4. Number 4. First off, you should notice that it is not equal to 0. We always want quadratics equal to 0. There's only one exception to this. If we're doing completing the square, then I don't have to set them equal to 0. And if you're good with completing the square, you can go ahead and do completing the square to get the same answer that I'm about to show you. Now, if we want to equal to 0, that means I'm going to move the 19 over. If you're doing completing the square, you don't have to move the 19 over. And you have this. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm going to show you on a next problem because it's going to come up soon. So we have this. Now, whenever we have a trinomial, we always want to try factoring. And I factor by using an x. So I do my a times my c, which is negative 19. And my b is 16. Now, negative 19 is a prime number. What prime numbers mean is only 1 times that number multiplies to be 19. But if you want, you could try doing 19 divided by 2, 19 divided by 3, 19 divided by 4. But basically, there's no two numbers that multiply to be 19 other than 1 and 19. So that means 1 and 19 have to go here, 19 and 1. One of them has to be negative, but there's no way I can add together be 16. So that means factoring doesn't work. If factoring doesn't work, then I have to use my quadratic formula, which is this. Okay, so let me change colors here, and we're going to plug everything into this equation. So that means we have negative 16 plus or minus 16 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 19, all divided by 2 times 1. Okay, this is pretty massive. What you want to do first is get the number underneath the square root first. So 16 squared is 256. Then I want to multiply negative 4 times 1 times negative 19. And that turns into a positive number, so plus 76. This is equal to 332. Alright, and it's all divided by 2. Okay, now we're about to talk about another topic that is very important in algebra. Right now we have this number, square root of 332. In order to break this down to get to one of my answers, we got to think of a factor tree. So I actually need a little bit more space. So hopefully, here, I'll erase this part. And I'm going to write down what I said. Now, if you think of a factor tree, you think of two numbers that multiply to be 332. You can pick any numbers you want, but you want to try to think as big as possible. And even though it ends with a 2, I'm going to try 4 first. So try 332 divided by 4. Now, if that didn't make sense, here, let me just do the 2. That way everybody knows that an even number can be divided by 2. So let's do 2 times 166. Now 2 cannot be broken down again. This is a prime number, but 166 can be broken down again. It's also an even number, so it can be broken down by 2, which leaves you with 83. 83 cannot be broken down, but I'm going to try. I'm doing 83 divided by 3, 83 divided by 4, 83 divided by 5, and I keep looking for numbers that can multiply to be 83. I'm not coming up with anything, which means we leave 83 alone. Now the way that square roots work is you want to look for a match. And I have a match of 2's. I have 2 2's here, so it's kind of like we're playing Go Fish or something. We got to look for a match. Once we have a match, we're going to pull out that match. So this is what's going to happen next. We're going to have negative 16 plus or minus our match, which is 2, and then we leave behind the number or the numbers that didn't have a match. And if we have more than one number, we have to multiply them together. Just like if we have more than one match, we have to multiply those together. Alright, now all of this is still divided by 2. I know you think I'm crazy right now, but we're almost finished. All we have to do next is divide by 2 each one of our answers. So we take this 16 and we divide by 2. We take this 2, divide by 2, and this 2 right here, divide by 2. I can't touch this 83 because this 83 is underneath the radical. You can only do this with coefficients, and you can only do what I'm doing because we only have one number on the denominator. If we had 2 numbers on the denominator, then you can't do this. But since it's only one number, I can reduce everything by 2, and that would give us the answer of negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 83. I don't have a number on the bottom anymore, it's just 1. I don't have to write that. And that is my answer. Hopefully that made sense because this is a kind of a complex question. Alright, here comes number 5. Number 5 is talking about, well, he solved it using parentheses. So let's try factoring first. If we try factoring first, we're drawing an x. We're thinking what our a times our c is. Remember, our a is in front of a x squared, our c is right here, and that would be negative 12. And our b in this problem is negative 4. I need to think of numbers that multiply to be negative 12, add together be negative 4. So I take 12, 12 divided by 1, 12 divided by 2, 12 divided by 3. And I want to think of what combination multiplies to be negative 4. So that would be, hopefully you know this, negative 6 and positive 2. If you beat me to that answer, good job. You're going to do very well in Algebra 2 when you see this again. Okay, now next, I want to factor or use my box. My first term goes in the first box. My last term goes in the last box. And I want to write my 2 answers with an x. I take my GCF out of this first column. The only thing in common between these are just an x. And then what times x is negative 6x? That's negative 6. And what times, or sorry, right here. What times x is plus 2x? That's a positive 2. Alright, now, if you take a look at this, he did the first step right. Because we always want our equation equal to 0. That means he pulled over the 12 and he subtracted 12 on both sides. So he did this first step right, which is the same thing we did. We factored this first step. Now, if you take a look at the next step, he's supposed to have these outside of the box answers. He's supposed to have x plus 2 and x minus 6. He does not have that right. So that would be the answer that is wrong. Okay, here comes the next question. Alright, number 6 is talking about completing the square. Completing the square, you have to remember your steps. Here is the steps written down a little bit different. Well, it's the same as how Mr. Gabriel explained it, but I just have it on the screen. Okay, so my first step is to make sure the coefficient has a 1. Does my coefficient of x squared have a 1? Yes, that is right. If not, we would have to divide everything. Then it says, if necessary, add a number to both sides of the equation so it equals, we have a number equal to that. That is also already true. Okay, so we already have a 5 over here. Because remember, only completing the square, we don't want it equal to 0. Then it says, find 1/2 of the number. That's the same thing as saying divide by 2. And then we're going to square it. So we're going to take our b and the coefficient of x, that's our b. We're going to take our b and divide by 2. Because this is our a, this is our b, and this is our c in this case. We actually made c over to the other side. But we take our b and divide by 2. Well, -4 divided by 2 is -2. So we're on step 3 right here. Then we have to square it. So -2 squared is +4. And then we're supposed to add this to both sides of the equation. But that I'm just going to stop right here because that's what the question says, is what should be added to both sides of the equation. Well, that answer is right here, this +4. So I don't have to keep doing this completing the square steps because this is all they asked for. Okay, next question. Alright, this question is talking about what method again? It is talking about completing the square. So whenever you do completing the square, you gotta have your steps. And this is not given to you on STAAR, so you're gonna have to memorize this. Now the first thing it says is make sure the coefficient of x squared is 1. Do we have that? Yes, we do. Then we have to make sure it's equal to something. It's equal to -9, so we're good. Okay, and we have our x terms by themselves, so that's good. Now next, we find 1/2, or the same thing as divide by 2, of our b. So here is our b here. So we're going to take 8. So I'm on step 3. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Then we take this 4 and we square it. We have 16. And then we're supposed to add this to both sides of the equation. So if I add 16 to both sides of the equation, I need to know what -9 plus 16 is. Well, -9 plus 16 is, and actually, hang on, let me change colors. Alright, -9 plus 16 is 7. Alright, so that means right now, it's not 25. So right now, I can take J out of consideration and take G out of consideration. We need to have it equal to 7. Now, this right here is a trinomial, and it's a perfect square trinomial. It is, if you want to see the work, it is the two numbers that multiply to be 16 and add together be 8, which is +4 and +4. So that means this breaks down to be x plus 4 equal to 7. Or another way to write two things when they're the same exact thing is to write x plus 4 squared. And that's the answer I'm looking for. Alright. Due to time, I am only going to do one more question. So here's our next question. Alright, now this one also says solve by completing the square. So we need our steps again. We're going to check off what we know. So first off, coefficient of x squared is 1. That's right. Then add a number, we don't have to worry about that because it's equal to 27, so this is good. Then we take our b, divide it by 2, and then we square it. So our b is -6. Here, let me put it down here. -6 divided by 2 is -3, and then we square it. That is equal to 9. So we're going to add 9 to both sides of the equation, which means we're going to have this. We're going to have x squared minus 6x plus 9 is equal to whatever 27 plus 9 is. 27 plus 9 is 36. Now right here, this trinomial is a perfect trinomial, so that means it's a square trinomial, and the two numbers that multiply to be positive 9 and add together to be -6 is -3 and -3. So we can make it look like this. Okay, now before I keep moving on, let's see what if they did step 1 right. So step 1 is this right here. Yes, they did that right. Step 2 is this right here. Yes, they did that right. So okay, so that means we have a different mistake. Now next, we want to take the square root of both sides here. Kind of like we did on our first question. Well, if you take the square root of this, you're just going to end up with x minus 3. If you take the square root of 36, you got to remember you have two answers, positive or negative, and the square root of 36 is 6. Is that what they have in step 3? No, that is not what they had. They said it was 18 because they didn't take the square root, they divided by 2. So this is where their mistake is. Okay, hopefully you have all this written down and it makes sense. Until next time.